everyone, Joshua Hanlon here at BrickCon Seattle 2022, and today we're taking a look at this massive spaceship that's all across the top of this table behind me here, and I've got the builder with me now, so if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll dive on into this.
My name is Wayne Hussey, in case you've never heard of me before. I build big stuff, and this was, I don't know, I just started tinkering around in my garage like I do, and I came up with an idea for a triangle that I might be able to make fairly rigid, and it became very rigid, and I said, well, a triangle. That looks like the kind of frame that maybe you could build a spaceship on. The International Space Station is basically a frame, and they stuck stuff on it, and I says, okay, there's my frame, I'll stick stuff on it. And that's where I got to.
So that's kind of the central core of this entire build then.
Core. And it's at scale, and if you look closely, you can see the figure size of the people that inhabit this spaceship. It's roughly 1/92nd scale, and it makes the ship overall about half-mile long.
What are some of the parts that you incorporated here that kind of make up that core?
The Nexagon is the key part. I have enabled this whole thing to go together by doing some checking and found out the deflection here is so slight, it fit, and at that point, it's done. I mean, just then it's just a part that's part of his frame, and just frame it out. Everything's just hung on it. It sticks on inverted studs, and
that's very impressive. So if we can maybe start at the left side down here at the end, and we'll kind of work our way through each section. Sure. You kind of explain what's happening here.
Understand that this is, like I said, a frame that stuff is hung on, and I had a different arrangement of the stuff at earlier stage of the build. But it turned out that when I started getting it ready for transport, that that configuration really wouldn't transport well. So I reconfigured it, and so I ended up putting all the shuttles up at the front end. And so you've got the major shuttles, and then you got the smaller shuttles. The major ones can carry many hundred people. The smaller ones anywhere from 4 to 10 people. And then there's the communications devices for the shuttle system. That's the next little ring there. Then there's the little ring of bubbles, the dark black bubbles. Those are what I call personal spaces, because you're in a sort of a generation ship or a traveling ship that may be out there for years and years and years, and you got to give your people private spaces. So there you get the bubbles. And then the rings, the habitat rings, these don't spin as the model, but if you understand as a space item those would spin and give artificial gravity. Wouldn't be very strong gravity, but be gravity that they would have. The core itself, of course, is going to be no gravity, and they would travel front to back inside the core. There are builds and parts of that don't show very well out there, but do show my little model. Well, let's see, Kraken. That wasn't actually part of my original build. That came about because good old Todd Kubo, a good friend of mine, basically said, hey, let's punk it. So we did, and we just finished that punking when you guys showed up. So excuse the mess.
Hey, it looks great, though, and it looks like, the tentacles are wrapping around everything there.
Tentacles do that. They go anywhere they can fit. And in this case, they're fitting right into the hydroponics bays and ripping some people out. But of course, the soldiers have just started attacking back. We don't know if it's going to be successful, but I doubt it. But there's the hydroponics gardens, and just below that, the blue are the environmental tank or atmosphere tanks. Those are used for carrying all the gases that they would need throughout the flight. And that includes not just oxygen, but also nitrogen and other gases that we as humans need to live with. In the next section, I got another section of bubbles, and then I got my drones. The drones might be used for, understand that a colony ship would end up at a place, whether it's a planet, a moon, whatever. They're going to be in a place, and they're going to have none of the technology and none of the machinery they need to make the colony work. So it's all the extra little shuttles in the front, and all those could be operated as like a package delivery type shuttle. So they're all items that are of higher technology or higher ability to build, which you would not be able to do on a fresh colony. So you carry it with you. And that also answers the question of what the cargo modules hold. They'll hold items like Well, say your farming equipment. You got to have your plows and your harvesters and all that. And those are fairly large containers. They're approximately 60 feet long, about 20 feet wide and 20 feet tall if you go in scale. And they also carry building materials, sheets of metal or whatever, high-tech building materials they use to fabricate their houses or cities or whatever when they get there, until they can start generating the stuff they need for themselves with the mining equipment and the refinery equipment that's also in the cargo pods. I mean, the cargo pods carry everything for after landing, and everything else is carried in the core, which, if you notice in these little center core devices, you have along here is the energy core for the entire ship. That's the yellow. And then up here, you can barely see it. I don't know how to show it to your camera, but there's a gray tube. That's the transport tube, because you go down into the core, get on the tube, on the rope that pulls you end to end of the ship. There's no gravity. You don't need to walk. You don't need a transport car. You just grab them and let go. So when you get all that going, these containers, which are very large, if you can tell based on the size of the people, and that would be where regular food storage or other materials that are used for living that aren't the metals and stuff that you need after you land. The next section is where you'd have your fuel for the reactors and the reactors themselves. And the last section is the engine section, where you have, of course, whatever engine we could ever create as humans. But I like to, they put this in a sci-fi category, and I kind of think that it's just the sci, not the fi, because it's something that humanity could do if they could work out the propulsion for either the shuttles or the main drive. Everything else we could build right now. Yeah. There's nothing out of range of our technology right now.
And I think that's what makes this such a cool build here. And you mentioned at the very beginning of the video that you'd like to build big. So when you're working on a build of this scale, what is kind of some of that thinking and planning process like for you as this comes together?
Well, there's been many conversations throughout the AFL community for years and years about, well, let's build a capital ship. And I've always thought that, well, capital ship means, large population. And so you can't do minifig scale anything and call it a capital ship. So I always, if I'm going to go for a ship that's realistic, it has to have a size that is realistic. This would hold approximately 1,500 people, but I have already understood that with the way it's designed, the population could grow to 10,000. They'd still be relatively comfortable. And if they really got into trouble, they would just simply close off these triangles with the materials from the building materials, and then the entire core could be pressurized, and they'd have enough space to live for up to maybe 60 or 70,000 people. So it's a generational ship as well as a colonization ship. And we don't know how long the trip is going to be, because, again, back to what is the propulsion?
Mm-hmm. Do you try to keep track of the number of pieces in a build like this at all when you're working on it?
In fact, I did on this one because it was kind of fun. I've been doing some CAD work and drawing my own pieces, and so almost every piece in this model is in my CAD system. And yes, the model is in the CAD system. So this is running about 37,000, 38,000. I don't know exactly, because it's modules and it doesn't quite count the same way. Mm-hmm. But it's at least 30 to 35,000 pieces. Yeah.
And then what's the process to get a build of this size to a convention like BrickCon here and transporting all of that?
Well, as I said earlier, that I had to rearrange the modules that are sitting on it to make it break up better. There's 5 main sections. The first section ends just behind the shuttles. Second section just behind the habitat rings. Third section just behind the drone ring. The last section is cargo, and everything else is just part of the engine block.
And you've got all sorts of different types of building throughout this. So you've got more square sections, lots of rounded sections here. So what are some of your kind of favorite parts, techniques, or things that you found worked well as you were adding the different sections of this build?
Mainly it's what's the function that this particular object, this module needs, and that determines what it needs. I mean, okay, what is a cargo module? Well, it's just a box. I like the rounding of the stuff. I love round stuff. I've been working years and years to make round. And this one, again, back to my computer, I was able to find out that if I put the pieces in this location relative to each other, the amount of stress put on the Lego is so small that it will work. That's the same thing that happened to the triangle. If anyone out there builds this triangle with the non-hexagons and looks at it, it actually doesn't fit. But it's so close that you can push it in and the Lego will stretch that much without any stress, long-term stress.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for all your work that you put into this build and for bringing it out to the show here. It looks great on display, and I appreciate you taking us through the whole thing. So keep up the good work.
Thanks for stopping by at the right time.